The first decade in my career was definitely learning by failure. The other big pivotal moment was just tracking my behaviors. What was I doing? I wanted to be more aware of what was happening in my life as a person, not just as a professional. When I started over indexing on those human elements, my professional performance went through the roof. I was able to close $14.1 million in ARR in less than 10 months. And that was an eye opener for me to say, wait a minute, there's something here.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of continuous learning inside companies. And joining me this week for part 2 of our conversation is Brandon Fluharty. As I mentioned last week, Brandon is the founder of Be Focused, Live Great. He is also, as you'll hear in our conversations, a failed professional footballer in Europe, that is, soccer player, to those of my American audience members. He went bankrupt. He has no college degree. He has no MBA, but he did go and string together multiple years of 7-figure sales as a strategic account executive. And in his own capacity now as an independent operator, business owner, entrepreneur, he is a consultant to top companies and a very highly sought after influencer on LinkedIn. So last week, we talked about the lessons that Brandon learned to get him to this point. All of that stuff that I just described now seems almost implausible when you think about where he started from. And, Brandon's honest about this. There was 2 decades worth of learning to move up 2 levels in the sort of 3-level framework that he describes. In this episode, we talk about how to manage and how Brandon managed time, energy, and attention. So key, probably the 3 most important factors in self-reliance, in being able to take ownership of your own calendar, as Brandon says. In this episode, you'll learn about why it's so easy to fall back into the default state of following the rules and the copy-paste culture that we're in, how to snap out of that, how to be human first, how Brandon paid attention to his habits and what effect that had on everything else he was doing, and how to focus on the things that matter but can't necessarily be measured. Brandon tells some really great stories about some of the qualities that he tapped into that made him a better seller, a better leader, and a better consultant. And finally, we also talk about the dangers of comparison culture and why that's another trap to avoid and how to avoid that along this path of really letting go of the rules that are imposed upon us by others. So a very, very poignant conversation and an important one. It really hits home in the themes that we want to cover in this season 2 of the Learning Culture Podcast. So with that, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Brandon Fluharty. So how did that play out in a sales career where, you had multiple 7-figure years in a row, that I know there was some burnout in there as well. So yeah. I'd love to hear about that. But you clearly built a system there that worked for you. How did that look?
Yeah. So after discovering that I wasn't going to be a professional soccer player, got into sales. The first decade in my career was definitely learning by failure. And
yeah.
It culminated with me actually subscribing to these old rules, the hustle culture. This was, going back into the early to mid 2000s when it very much was, wearing a lack of sleep like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
It was, show the world how busy you are. That's a great trait. Any empty space on your calendar, well, fill it up. There's always something to do. There was that culture that I definitely got caught up in. And at 32, I ended up in the hospital and I had a mini stroke. And
wow.
Typically there's 2 reasons why somebody would have a stroke in their early 30s. Either you have a pre-existing condition like a hole in your heart, which after a battery of tests, it was discovered I did not have any of that, or heavy drug use, which was definitely not the case for me. And so the only thing I could point to at the time was just sort of how hard I was working, how little I was sleeping. And it was definitely a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't heed, some of that advice and sort of fell back into the trap.
Yeah.
But slowly but surely, I did start implementing things that made life better. And again, one of those things was sort of getting away from thinking like a professional first and thinking more like a human first. And the other big pivotal moment was actually when the pandemic hit and the world slowed down for everybody. I started an interesting experiment, which was just tracking my behaviors. What was I doing? I wanted to be more aware of what was happening in my life as a person, not just as a professional. And so I started tracking things like my sleep. I started tracking things like, again, my habits. When was I doing certain things? Was I allowing myself to get distracted? And I noticed a few things, which was I was inconsistent with my sleep schedule. So I started to clean that up, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, trying to optimize my sleep around what I should be doing. And I was wearing a wearable. I was wearing Whoop and got some really helpful insights from that. I started discovering that, hey, one of the first things I was doing was just when the alarm goes off, it was my smartphone. I would turn it off. And then the first thing I would do would be scroll social media or look at Slack or look at email. And that would send me down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So I became much more deliberate and intentional about cleaning those things up. And that gave me the insight of just by tracking this stuff every day, it became more insightful on where I was spending my time, spending my energy, spending my attention. And once I had those insights, I could turn those insights into feeling more inspired. And that inspiration allowed me to develop intentions, to be purposeful with, okay, let's try this and see what happens.
Yeah.
And long story short, what I discovered that when I started over-indexing on those human elements, my professional performance went through the roof. I was successful sort of grinding around the clock up until that point. And just to put some real numbers around this, it took me 2 years once I felt like I got to a stage of selling strategic accounts to Fortune 500 companies. It took me 2 years to build $11 million in ARR, annual recurring revenue. So it took 24 months to build an $11 million a year business. When I made this shift because COVID forced it on me and everybody else, and I started adopting this human first, professional second approach, started tracking things, developing this more sophisticated personal operating system, I was able to close $14.1 million in ARR in less than 10 months. And that was an eye opener for me to say, wait a minute, there's something here. There's something to the fact if we can over-index on things that make us better, clearer thinkers, people who are in good moods because we're not sleep deprived, and we can make better decisions, and we can structure our day around the most important high value tasks versus just blindly accepting everything that comes because we have pressure behind us from our manager saying, how many proposals did you send out this week? Or how many meetings did you run? Becoming more deliberate about how I controlled my calendar and how I spent my time, energy, and attention. I could play almost like a game. I could utilize it because I knew very clearly, okay, I don't want to work all day because at a certain point, my cognitive load declines to a state where I can't deliver good work anymore. So I could be deliberate about shutting down for the day and be confident enough to tell my manager and leaders that this is why I'm shutting down at this time, because I'm actually delivering better performance for our clients when I do that.
Yeah.
And so it just sort of became this momentum builder and snowball effect that allow me to keep investigating this with curiosity. And I started to operationalize this more and systemize it more. And then I started sharing it with others, and started seeing great results in them.
Yeah.
And it just started to scale and snowball from there.
I just want to recap and hit a couple of the key notes that you mentioned there. One, you talked about, you said like almost, I think twice in your career, you experienced and demonstrated how easy it is to fall back into the default state.
Yeah.
Right. It's so even though you were in hospital, you still came back and you still went back to the playbooks and the hustle and all of that. And that it just proves that point of how easy it is to slip into that. And that what we're talking about here, purposeful performance, and we'll get to kind of that particular term, but like this is a hard thing to do. We're not talking about like just let it going with the flow and winging it, like this is difficult, right?
That's right.
Yeah. You talked about also paying attention to your habits. I think that's such a key thing. It's sort of like controlling the controllables. That's the stuff you can control, like what time you go to bed, what time you wake up, that kind of stuff. What do you check your phone? What you can't control is, the things that you realize were the human first things, or sorry, actually you can control, you can get better at them, but you can't measure them as well. You can measure like when you're going to sleep and all that sort of stuff. There's some things you can't measure. And there's almost this thing of like, we measure whatever we measure, we think it all matters, right? And we try and optimize that. And really, like only some of it matters. And there's this whole bunch of other stuff that actually really matters that we can't measure, like how empathetic you are and how well you listen, and all these kind of things. And those are the things that really make the difference.
I think that's a really good point. And what I started to discover of sort of measuring certain things, like you mentioned, that I could control, like when I went to sleep, how much I tried to give myself sleep. I started making these correlations between those soft skills, like how empathetic I could be in front of customers and clients, right? When, again, if we go back 3 or 4 years at peak COVID, Zoom fatigue was very much a real thing, still is a real thing. But especially back then when, no in-person meetings could take place, and we were trying to figure out, this just doesn't feel right. How do I get a multi-million-dollar deal done when I can't be in the same room with this executive? When, normally it was very customary to hop on a plane and travel across the country to have a 1-hour meeting. And then we found ourselves in these, back-to-back Zoom meetings, and at the end of the day felt exhausted, especially with so much going on in the world.
Right.
So when I started to, again, become more deliberate about those things, and then tracking my time, again, things that normally don't get tracked from a business standpoint. We typically track the activity, the business activities, sales activity, emails sent, number of phone calls made, number of meetings ran, proposals, and so forth. But when I started tracking, well, this is where my time went, and this is how I feel at the end of the day. My mood, the sentiment, the feeling angry or in a bad mood because, by the way, my sleep debt is rising above 3 hours. When I started seeing those things, it was about correlating it. It wasn't about competing with myself. Oh man, I got under 7 hours of sleep last night. I'm going to chastise myself. No, it was just about collecting this information and then starting to be more of a deliberate observer of what was happening in my world. And what I then found was, okay, when I looked back on this, because I gave myself the time at the end of the day or at the end of the week or at the end of the month to reflect back on it and see what was happening, certain trends started to emerge, which was, I started tracking it in a just a very simple Google sheet,
Mm-hmm.
and I called it my Thrive space.
Mm-hmm.
I had a holistic score. I would just add up these things, and my Thrive score was always highest when I got a certain amount of sleep. My sleep debt was low. I had no more than 4 hours of meetings in a day as a strategic account seller. I did 4 hours of deep work, which I measured through something called the Pomodoro technique. How many Pomodoros could I complete on really high value, highly meaningful work, like creating a narrative proposal for one of my key accounts. When I sort of found that harmony, I was always in a good mood at the end of the day, and my Thrive score was really high. And then, those moments when I had a high Thrive score and I could sort of note, some special outcomes that were happening that day. It was always like the professional outcomes were the highest when these human elements were in an optimal state for me. And so that allowed me then to completely redesign my calendar in a way that allowed me to say, okay, I know what is good work, not these arbitrary activity metrics. I know how to make an impact as a professional because I am in a state allowing myself to be finding my capacity as a human being and a person. I know how much good work is how much work is enough, right? How many meetings I should be to make sure that I can be empathetic in front of a client, that I can deliver good value to them. I'm not pulled in a million different directions and scrambling, and I can't deliver good work because I'm not giving myself the space to then follow up with high quality information and give them what they needed in a timely manner. So it just all started to become harmonized. And the lesson that I learned from that is wellness is not a retreat from hard work. Wellness is a requisite for delivering good work. And so when I started to harmonize those things, wellness and work, that allowed me to truly show up in a human first, professional second manner. Because when I take care of myself on the human front, the professional elements are a natural outcome of that.
Yeah, this is good shit. I want to talk about the challenge of adopting this mindset and why many people don't. But before I do that, I just want to also reiterate some of the other points you made there. It really is this case of like what you figured out through trial and error was that you stopping to take the time to sit down and write a narrative proposal, for example, versus like, I'm going to go and bulldoze through another 6 outreach and, 60 or whatever. And just to like, so it's like a numbers game versus like, I'm going to put a lot of deep work into this one thing and create a really compelling reason for this person to buy from me, and it's like contrasting those two approaches. And what you figured out was that slow down, focus, go deep, be creative works better. And one of the things like and so my question, most people's question is like, why don't more people do this, right? Like, why is it not? And I think one of the obvious reasons why is that it doesn't lead to immediate results, right? It's not an overnight thing like that. And so I'm curious, like what your story was like how long did this work until it started to work? What are your thoughts on that?
It definitely took a good decade of my sales career. So again, I kind of look at, if I look at this, the game, level 1 being, okay, use effort to gain skills. That was like the first decade of my career. Then the second decade was leveraging skills to earn outsized income. That gave me the financial independence to then enter level 3, which was, okay, use that financial independence to now fully own my calendar and be in 100% control of what goes on it, what I say yes and no to. And so a good 10 years, right, was, learning how to unlearn the old rules. And it's still a work in progress. I'm not saying that this is, something that's perfected. It's still something that I learn every day from, and I have to constantly evolve.
I mean, sort of the nature of an operating system, right? You're constantly getting feedback from the system. You're constantly tweaking it. and as you change and get older and whatever, like you're adapting the system to suit you,
That's right.
which
Yep.
is awesome. Yeah. So you're now you're in that level 3 stage. I'm assuming kind of near the beginning of it, probably similar
Yeah.
to me, of like now you taking full ownership of your calendar. You're going out there
Yeah.
as an independent business owner,
Hmm.
and you're
Hmm.
helping others now do some of these things, right? And so like I
Hmm.
know you feel the same frustration that I probably do with my business, is like the resistance to this stuff that we're talking about, right? And
Yeah.
one of those resisting points is like, well, this is going to take forever, like, or what,
Yeah.
so how are you thinking about that? Because there is some,
Yeah.
there are some quick wins that you can get to. There are
Yeah.
some things that you can do to demonstrate that this will work. I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, what your thoughts are on those.
Yeah. I've really had to catch myself on being more patient and adopting long-term thinking. And again, a lot of that I've had to systemize, because I think, where we get into trouble, one of the pitfalls and challenges of the hero's journey of adopting a good personal operating system and more purposeful performance is comparison syndrome.
Oh,
And
yes.
when we go on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, and we think that there are people that even I maybe admire who seem so far advanced in their journey, and I want that now. I think we have to catch ourselves. That's where the downside of the human element is, if we allow ourselves to compare ourselves, that can take us down a rabbit hole that we don't intend. And so, again, I try to put things in place that don't feel rote and mundane, but actually use routine to feel inspired. And so, again, things like trying to make better decisions with the finite resources, just using design and systems to work backwards and say, okay, here are the resources I'm dealing with, my time, energy, and attention. Where do I want to direct them? How can I make better decisions with them? So if the first thing that I do is immediately go scroll social media, and I put myself in a reactive state versus a proactive state, I'm going to be reacting to others. So of course, my natural monkey brain, my natural human state is to then just going to want to compare myself to somebody who's talking about how they've delivered these amazing results. And then I put myself out of my own path.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking in their terms versus my terms. So then, what's the process to protect your time, energy, and attention? Don't give your attention to that until I've maybe done something important for myself. And so I could use routines like a startup routine to get myself primed, just like a world-class athlete would maybe get themselves ready for intense training or competition. They're not going to go lift the 300-pound weight right out of the gates. They're going to warm themselves up. They're not going to sprint as fast as they can down the track. They're going to get injured, pull a hamstring. So they know how to warm themselves up. Same thing as a knowledge professional or revenue creator. We need to prime our brains, get ourselves ready. So protecting your time, energy, and attention so that you can apply your time, energy, and attention on that high value activity, your most important thing, that then gives you the ability to then say, okay, I at least have a win on the board for the day. Right? The game that we're playing every day.
Exactly.
I could then kind of check that off of my personal operating system and feel good about myself. Now I'm in a better state to be serving others, serving those that I'm trying to help, and not feel like I've been on the back foot before I've even gotten my day started.
Yeah, I mean, that is really such good advice, and it allows you to then step into that more reactive state where you can be, because you've gotten that big thing out of the way, right? And that's and so much of this is about you talk about purpose, you talk about intention a lot. So much of it about is being clear what that thing is. That those are your quick wins. That's your daily wins, right? That compound day over day over day, and eventually get that $14 million in ARR. And so it's just stacking together those small wins, and then giving yourself time to also be there for others, be reactive, because also you can't predict it, right? You can't plan your whole
Yeah,
day perfectly. Like, you've got to have
that's
that
right.
flexibility built in.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
so this has been such a fascinating conversation, and very wide reaching. I want to sort of bring this to somewhat of a close here. You're working on a book. It's called
Mhm.
Purposeful Performance. I'm assuming a lot of what we talked about is kind of in there. Could you just, like, what is
Yeah.
the what was the impetus behind the book? Like, what's and
Yeah.
where do you think what do you think it's going to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is what we unpacked here in our conversation, which was, as a salesperson, I subscribed to rules that I didn't create for myself. And I found following those rules put me in trouble. It even landed me in the hospital. um, and there's something inherently broken from that. And what I learned as I climbed and eventually found success on my terms is that the people who wrote those rules blindly accepted them themselves.
Yeah.
The CEOs, the leaders, the managers that I trusted, these were people that I respected. But then when I started to peel back the onion, I certainly learned that they're no smarter
Yeah.
than I was.
Yeah.
And that was empowering. And so what I aim to do with Purposeful Performance is to sort of share those insights, to say we're at an interesting intersection in the world, right? We're still trying to fit in performance around rules that don't apply in today's innovation era. And in order to feel at harmony with what can be done and what's possible and what we desire for ourselves, that needs a good personal operating system. And one of the best beacons that a good personal operating system is working is it feels like work is play. It should feel like a fun game you get to play every day.
Yeah.
And that's the aim of the book, is to kind of deconstruct that in very applicable, easy to understand principles that allow you to implement these things in a very easy, intuitive way.
Well, I'm excited to read it. I'm assuming you're writing for this definition of revenue creator that you
Yeah.
And but I can tell it's going to be broadly applicable to anybody who, like we talked about, sees himself creating value, which is awesome. So I'm excited to see that take shape and take on a life of its own. So last question then, you talk a lot about purpose and intention, like we said. Brandon, what is your purpose?
Yeah, I think my purpose is to help bring purpose to others. Again, I had to struggle unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And I had to fail in ways that I don't believe others should have to fail to discover these insights. So I hope to bring purposeful performance, certainly at this stage of my life. This is what excites me. This is what I'm obsessed with. And I want to help other revenue creators, other value creators discover this for themselves. So it's not necessarily shortcuts. I'm not about providing hacks or ways that you don't better discover yourself on a more holistic level. But it's more about how you can acquire that knowledge and get more in touch with your deeper self, and remove the noise that covers that up on a seemingly constant basis. 35, I think the stat is like we make 35,000 decisions on average a day, right?
That's wild.
And it's only going to get worse with, computers that sit on our face and still in devices that we're connected to. It's going to get worse before it gets any better. So how do we set ourselves up to get better connected with the things that we know we're capable of.
Yeah.
That's purposeful performance, and I want to deliver that at scale.
Yeah, well, I love the mission, and we briefly touched on this, and I'm sure a topic that maybe we can do a whole new episode on is, in the world that we're moving into of you mentioned like wearables on your face and your arms and everywhere else. Yeah. Also, the artificial intelligence that's going to be able to, and already is able to do way more computational logic than we could ever hope to do. That game's taken. That role within the game is taken. Like the new role, the only role left for us is a creative one. You're leading by that example. So, Brandon,
appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been super fun, man. I really enjoyed it. Everybody listening, go check out on Brandon's website. You can get in touch with him, brandonfluharty.com. That's in the show notes as well. Plus his LinkedIn. Definitely connect there. He's a fantastic follow on LinkedIn. And Brandon, this was a ton of fun, man. Thank you.
Yeah, loved it. Thanks, Andrew.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Brandon as much as I did. We released it as 2 parts because it really is 2 parts to the story, right? There's the lessons learned and the mistakes that were made in the beginning, and then there was this the sense of calm, equanimity, and systems that were built around all that helped Brandon be successful now. And I really wanted to draw contrast between those things. As always, if you want to get deeper into some of these ideas, please follow along with us on the newsletter. We have over 3,000, almost 4,000 people now subscribed to my weekly email that you can find at CuriousLionLearning.com/newsletter. I will see you beautiful people next week. Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.